The Indiana Hoosiers travel to the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Notre Dame's favored by 7.5 points. And I think that whichever team is more battle-tested, and that is to be seen, is going to step up and win this football game. Again, the Irish are favored by 7.5 points. The game takes place at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, Friday, December 20th. It's in South Bend. Tickets are already priced at over $1,000. The stadium is sold out, I do believe. Both teams are top 10 in football power. Both are highly rated analytically. Notre Dame and Indiana are both very dominant. They have very efficient offenses, very efficient defenses. I'm excited for this game. You also have two head coaches who are relatively new to the gig, to their gig, to being a head coach at a Power 4 program in college football. I mean, Marcus Freeman is in year 3 as a head coach. Not just as the head coach at Notre Dame, year 3 as a head coach, period. Notre Dame's his first ever head coaching job. Curt Cignetti, bless me, that's a bad sneeze. Curt Cignetti has been at Indiana for only 1 year. This is his first year, very successful season. And he's been a head coach before, James Madison and Elon, but this is his first job in the Power 4. And overall, Notre Dame losing to NIU, bad loss, but won the other 11 games on their schedule. Indiana, bad loss at Ohio State, made a lot of mistakes in that game, but won the other 11 games on their schedule. Both of these teams overall have had success, and I think have been well coached, have played to their strengths, have been fundamentally sound, and they have done their best to negate their weaknesses. I want to talk about their weaknesses, but first talk about some of the strengths of these teams to really get into the matchup that's going to be taking place here. For Indiana, and I've discussed this before, their non-negotiable throughout the season has clearly been their defensive line. It's been their defensive tackles, C.J. West, James Carpenter, Tyreek Tucker, their defensive ends, especially Michael Kamara, but also Linnell Carr Jr., and ultimately a rushing defense that is one of the best in the entire country. Indiana's rushing defense this season, let me give you some numbers to show how dominant it is. Second in opponent yards per carry, allowing 2.6. Second in opponent rushing first downs per game, allowing 5.3. First in opponent rushing yards per game, allowing 76.2. Fifth in opponent rushing attempts per game, allowing 29.1. Teams do not like to run the football on Indiana because teams have learned that they can't. They can't do it. Ohio State couldn't do it. Granted, they had a very dinged-up offensive line, but even as the game progressed and Indiana was getting worn down, Ohio State couldn't run the football. Purdue couldn't run the football. Michigan State couldn't. Michigan couldn't. Nebraska could not. Outside of a long run or two by Jonah Coleman, Washington could not. And Indiana has not played a strong schedule, especially in regards to rushing offenses. But nonetheless, when you look at relative performance and you look at numbers like I've just presented to you that are this strong, it's something to take notice of, really. And their linebackers are good. Their defense is good. It's so interesting looking at these two defenses who are both highly ranked. Indiana is better in basically everything compared to Notre Dame in terms of total defense and rushing defense. And then in passing defense and scoring defense, Notre Dame is basically better at everything compared to Indiana. So it's interesting looking at these different statistical categories and seeing how dominant they are overall, but also how dominant they are compared to each other in certain categories. Indiana is third in opponent yards per play, allowing only 4.1. Notre Dame's fifth, allowing 4.4. In scoring defense, Indiana allows 15.7 points per game. Notre Dame allows 13.6. Indiana only allows 0.252 points per play. Notre Dame allows 0.2 points per play. Sixth and third for both of these teams, respectively. For Notre Dame, their key strength, they have a good defense. They do. In the same way that Indiana has a good offense. In fact, the numbers would suggest they're near elite to elite in those categories that I mentioned. For Notre Dame, their defense, and Indiana, their offense. But I think Notre Dame's biggest non-negotiable here is their rushing offense. Their defense has not played a lot of high-functioning offenses. I mean, A&M, one of their best wins of the year, came when the Aggies arguably were at their worst, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. They started Connor Weigman. As the year evolved, it was clear that Marcel Reed was the better quarterback and better fit for their system. And it was, game one with a new staff and new transfers. NIU doesn't exactly have a good offense. USC's offense has been its worst under Lincoln Riley, and Lincoln Riley had his worst offense of his career with this USC team. Georgia Tech didn't have Haynes King, and service academies are service academies. They're very limited. The constant, and something that I love from Notre Dame, is their rushing offense, because like Indiana, and Indiana's rushing defense, no matter how weak the strength of schedule, what they are doing is impressive, and it is to be paid respect to and paid attention to. That is Notre Dame's rushing offense. Notre Dame averages 0.622 points per play, which is first, and that's insane. Their points per play margin is 0.422, which is first. Indiana is second in points per play, allowing 0.598, and third in points per play margin, averaging 0.346. Notre Dame is third in points per game. They are third in offensive touchdowns per game, and a huge part of the reason why is they are second in yards per carry, averaging 6.3. That's insane. And averaging 224.8 rushing yards per game, which is 11th. And they do that while only averaging 35.7 rushing attempts per game, which is 75th. Now, their passing offense is something that we will talk about in a few seconds because that's a weakness, but their offensive line is incredible. And their running back room with Jadarian Price and, more importantly, with Jeremiah Love is something that I am impressed by. Jeremiah Love is an All-American caliber running back, and Billy Scruth, Pat Coogan, Rocco Spindler, Emil Wagner, and all those players on the offensive line, they're high level. Joe Rudolph has done a great job coaching and developing that offensive line, and Mike Denbrock has done an excellent job, I think, in adapting his scheme to Notre Dame's personnel. Those are the strengths of these teams. Their weaknesses, I think for Indiana, it's their interior offensive line, it's their special teams, and collectively, it's their pass block. Ever since Indiana has suffered some injuries on the offensive line, and more importantly, when they played against high-level talent on the D-line or on defense, Michigan and then Ohio State, they have struggled in pass protection. They have struggled mightily. The injury to Drew Evans at guard resulted in Tyler Steffens stepping up and taking that left guard spot, and he has been the weak link on that offensive line ever since. Carter Smith is a beast, I think. Mike Caddick is solid too. Bray Lynch and Trey Wettig are good as well, but Steffens provides a little bit of a hole for opposing defenses, and this offensive line, even before the injury, was not elite exactly in pass protection, giving up some sacks to Maryland and inferior opponents early in the year. That's a weakness for Indiana, and their special teams started off solid, started off strong, but ever since the month of November, their special teams has slowly been declining, and at times, like against Ohio State, teetering on the brink of disaster. Indiana gives up 1.6 sacks per game, which is 46th, and they have a 5.56 quarterback sack percentage, which is 53rd. It's not like Notre Dame's elite at pass protection. They're not Oregon. Notre Dame gives up 1.3 sacks per game and a 4.4% quarterback sack percentage, which is 33rd, but still, they're better than Indiana in that category. And as for special teams, punting has been an issue, like against the Ohio State game. And you look at, the interior of the offensive line, that also affects Indiana's rushing offense, which I think is strong, really at gaining short yardage. And their running backs are not exactly built to be speed and space running backs. But nonetheless, they're only averaging 4.2 yards per carry. And that is 72nd nationally. So those are some areas that I look at Indiana and ultimately have some concerns with. Interior offensive line, the pass block, the depth overall, which is something that I've talked about before, how Indiana does not have a lot of blue chip talent and consequentially elite depth everywhere. Notre Dame, talent-wise, is better off, but still not far better off because their wide receiver and tight end rooms are very, very limited. I mean, I said on Twitter that this team is kind of a reincarnation of 2022 Michigan. And it is, in a lot of ways. They have talent everywhere. They're talented everywhere. There is no place where Notre Dame lacks talent. But there are places where you question if the talent is being utilized properly, if you question whether there's talent there, but is it ever going to break through? I look at their receiver room, for example. Their leading receiver has barely over 400 receiving yards. It's Bo Collins, their wide receiver, with 427 receiving yards. Jaden Greathouse is 345. Mitchell Evans, and a preseason All-American tight end in my mind, are very close to it, only has 272, and he's averaging 9.4 yards per reception. Riley Leonard barely has a 140.8 passer rating. He's completing 66% of his throws, averaging 7.1 yards per pass attempt. His QBR is 15th, 16 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. He's a good quarterback, but elite, I don't necessarily think so. And consequentially, with some of the weakness at wide receiver, at tight end, and also Riley Leonard being, not a Heisman caliber quarterback, you get a passing offense that is a little bit questionable there. Whereas Jeremiah Love, Darian Price, and that offensive line are all elite and can punish really anyone who faces against them. Bo Collins, Jaden Greathouse, Jordan Faison, and Mitchell Evans, and Riley Leonard, at least Leonard's arm, his legs are absolutely incredible. He has several hundred rushing yards. They sort of play off of the rushing offense. And that's good as long as the rushing offense is successful. But circle back to, much like Indiana, a weaker strength of schedule, you wonder that if either of these teams, if their weaknesses can get exploited and their strengths are limited, whether it's this game or maybe a future game, depending on who wins, you wonder how they'll be able to adapt to that. Like Indiana could not adapt to Ohio State's pass rush. They failed. They couldn't do it. And when they finally did, the game was already over, and there was clearly a change of pace for Ohio State. For Notre Dame, we have seen that if you can patiently run the ball on them, because their rushing defense is a little bit shaky, just a little bit, and if you can really limit their passing offense along with keeping a lid on top of their rushing offense, that was the strategy Northern Illinois used. Controlled the clock, kept running the ball, had one big play, just one. It was a fluke pass that went for nearly 90 yards to the house for a touchdown. You can beat them. So the critical matchup, the most important one, the one where I'm fascinated to see how adjustments are made here throughout the game, and one that I think involves the most coaching, is Indiana's pass protection, their running backs, their offensive linemen protecting quarterback Curtis Rourke, and how their offensive coordinator, Tino Sansuri, is going to manage that, is going to scheme that against Al Golden's defense, and specifically his defensive front, the defensive line group and the linebacker group. Notre Dame on the year has 30 sacks, and they have players up front like R.J. Oben, Howard Cross III, Riley Mills, Joshua Burnham, and they have some depth there, and they have some serious players. And then Jack Kaiser, who's a veteran, Drake Bowen, a younger, talented player. How does their front operate against Carter Smith, Tyler Steffens, Mike Caddick, Bray Lynch, and Trey Weddig on the line, Zach Horton, Indiana's tight end, and whatever running back Indiana has, whether it's Ellison, Lawton, Black, in pass protection? And does Curtis Rourke use his legs a little bit more? Curtis Rourke ran an option offense at Ohio, and I was surprised that his legs weren't used more against Ohio State. They were used a little bit later, and that helped Indiana get down the field and score their garbage time touchdown. So do they use that in this game? I think they should, but we'll have to see. If I were Notre Dame, I would be attacking that offensive line fairly early. and sending pressure, timing up blitzes, and seeing if they can handle it. And, if you get burned for a play or they drive down the field, well, you adapt. This is the college football playoffs. It's not time to play scared, and that goes for both sides. This is a game to be aggressive. This is a game to play to your potential and not play down to your opponent. Another critical matchup here, one that I think is more strength on strength. Of course, coaching is involved in everything, but is Indiana's rushing defense against Notre Dame's rushing offense, because Notre Dame has just ran through everyone all season long, and no one has ran on Indiana or through them. This is the unstoppable force against the immovable object, is Indiana's rushing defense, specifically their defensive line, which is a non-negotiable, against Notre Dame's non-negotiable of their offensive line and running back room. Whoever wins this wins the game. And I think that's the case even if, let's say for Indiana, they can't protect Curtis Rourke at all, and they just give up sack after sack after sack, and maybe they only get a few consistent drives. If Notre Dame can't run the football with Indiana's passing defense, well, then it just becomes a very low-scoring game, and any advantage that Notre Dame has over Indiana in terms of pass rush and pass protection is sort of negated there. You could also say that if Indiana is able to move down the football, they protect Curtis Rourke, and they're scoring a lot on this Notre Dame defense. If they can't stop Notre Dame's run, well, Notre Dame can probably dictate the pace of the game, and even if it's a shootout or if it looks like it's going to be a shootout, they can slow it down. Or if it is a shootout and out of control, well, as long as they time everything right, they can make sure that they're the last team that scores and therefore the team that wins. So that is a fascinating matchup. Indiana's rushing defense, their defensive line against Notre Dame's rushing offense, their offensive line and running back room, and also Notre Dame's defensive front, specifically in pass rush, against Indiana's offensive line, their tight ends, their running backs, their pass blockers, and if Curtis Rourke can maybe use his mobility more to negate some of Notre Dame's pass rush and how comfortable he is in the pocket. Is he seeing ghosts a bit after that Ohio State game when Notre Dame sends blitzes? Is he calm? Does he step up in the pocket? Does he maybe scramble a bit? We'll have to see, but I'm excited for this game, as I am for all the college football playoff games, but especially with this one, it being just a 7.5-point spread. My eyes will be glued to the TV screen, and these are two programs who, again, they've played weaker schedules, but these are also some of the more statistically dominant teams in the country. Power ratings factor in strength of schedule, and both of these teams are still top 10. In fact, Notre Dame is easily top 5 according to most power ratings. So go Fighting Irish and go Hoosiers. I'm excited to see this one live. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also hit that notification bell so that way you can get notified when new content from College Football with Sam drops. I appreciate you very much, and also share the video around to others who you know enjoy the sport of college football and love it as I do and as you do, and comment your thoughts down below so that we can have a conversation, because I want to know what you are thinking. And join our Discord server where we talk college football 24/7 via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. Thank you to my Heisman Patreon members, Crash2488, Brascal Rascal, and Kylo OH. Thank you to my All-American Patreon members, Chris Lane, Ismar, and Tyler Nye. And thank you to my All-Conference members, John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, and Will Loftus. Make sure to check out my merchandise store and or Patreon page, or super chat down in the comment section below to support the channel. The Patreon page and merchandise store links are in the description or down below in the pinned comment. I hope you have a wonderful day. It is December, so Merry Christmas and also Happy New Year. I will see you guys soon.